Are you gonna? I sent you the link so you could watch it.
Echad Yachid Umeyuchad, Echad Yachid Umeyuchad, Echad Yachid Umeyuchad, Echad Yachid Umeyuchad. One, only one, altogether one. 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 Echad Yachid Umeyuchad, one, only one, altogether one. Echad Yachid Umeyuchad, one, only one, altogether one.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's celebration of the launch of the new book, Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, Essential Teachings. My name is Tom Reed, and I am the Associate Director of the Betty Ann Greenbaum Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership of Hebrew College. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Miller Center, it was established in 2016 in memory of the late Betty Ann Greenbaum Miller, an outstanding student leader and alumna of Hebrew College. We are deeply appreciative to Dan Miller, Betty Ann's husband, for his ongoing support of our work. The mission of the Miller Center is to provide current and future religious and ethical leaders with the knowledge and skills to serve in a religiously diverse society. We do this through public programming, such as tonight's event, through publications, such as this new volume, through graduate theological and adult education courses, and through our cohort-based fellowship programs for high school students, undergraduates, and emerging professionals. Reb Zalman, may his memory continue to be a blessing, plays a pivotal role in our work at the Miller Center. His legacy as a pioneering interreligious explorer and innovator inspires much of what we do. While I did not have the opportunity to meet Reb Zalman, as a graduate of the Boston University School of Theology, I am proud to be a fellow alum of BU and part of an extended network of interreligious practitioners with ties to Reb Zalman and his teachers and peers. In fact, the story of Reb Zalman's first encounter with Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman at BU in 1955, where Thurman then served as dean of the university's historic Marsh Chapel, serves as a foundational model of interreligious hospitality and of a fruitful teacher-student or Rebbe-Chassid relationship. Reb Zalman's memory and legacy are very much alive in our work. It is therefore a special honor for me to welcome all of you this evening to the celebration of the new volume, Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, Essential Teachings. Before introducing the co-editors, and let me pull up a slide, the joys of Zoom and needing to share the right screen. There we go. I'd like to briefly highlight an upcoming opportunity to engage more deeply with Reb Zalman's life and legacy. As you'll see on the screen, Rabbi Or Rose will be offering a course through Hebrew College's Open Circle Jewish Learning Program entitled In Search of Renewal, the Spiritual Legacy of Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. You can register online using the link that I'm about to post in the chat. Sorry. There we go. I would also like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event. Aleph Alliance for Jewish Renewal, Naropa University, and the Yesod Foundation. Special thanks to Yesod for their generous support of the volume published by our dear colleagues at Orbis Books. We are delighted to be working with such thoughtful and dedicated folks from these wonderful organizations. We have a full program this evening with several wonderful speakers, so we will be keeping microphones muted. So if you have a comment or a question, please share those in the chat box. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the co-editors of this important new anthology, Pir Netanel Miles-Yepez and Rabbi Or Rose. Pir Netanel is the current head of the Inayati Maimuni order, which was co-founded with his teacher, Reb Zalman, fusing Sufi and Hasidic principles of spirituality. Netanel also served as Reb Zalman's editor, publisher, and co-writer for over a decade. An artist, religion scholar, publisher, and spiritual leader, he teaches in the Department of Religious Studies at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, and is a leading figure in the interspiritual and new monasticism movements. Rabbi Or Rose is the founding director of the Miller Center for Interreligious Learning and Leadership of Hebrew College and a founding faculty member of its rabbinical school. Among his recent publications is Words to Live By, Sacred Sources for Interreligious Engagement, also published by Orbis. And Or is also the curator of the current online initiative Psalm Season, a joint undertaking of Hebrew College and the Interfaith Youth Corps, or IFYC. Or and Netanel. Or you're muted.
You're muted, Or.
Aha. All of these months into the pandemic, and I still forget to unmute myself. I want to thank Tom for his help in organizing this evening's program and for his gracious introduction. I want to thank all of our partners. I want to thank all of the contributors and speakers and singers this evening. And a big thank you to all of the folks that are joining us from many places around the country and beyond. It would be inappropriate if I started without a bracha, without a blessing. Given the figure that we are celebrating and his life and work, let's begin with Birkat Shechianu, a blessing for being here right now. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shechianu, kimanu, higianu, lazman hazeh.
Amen.
So Netanel and I are going to lead off and tell you a little bit about the genesis of the book and some of the contours of the anthology. The first thing to say is that I thought of this volume because after Reb Zalman's death, I felt like I wanted to maintain a connection with my teacher. And for me, as a person that does a lot of reading his work was one way to do that, one important way to do that. And as I began to read more in depth, I felt like there was still so much of Reb Zalman's legacy that many, many people did not have access to. And so the next step was reaching out to a chavruta. And my partner in this endeavor is Netanel. And I asked him specifically because Netanel knows Reb Zalman's literary legacy like almost no one else in the world, quite frankly. And I also wanted to team with someone that knew Reb Zalman deeply. In fact, we knew Reb Zalman most intimately at different stages of our lives. And also someone that had great respect for Reb Zalman, but also experienced this person as basar vadam, as flesh and blood, and could sift and sort and clarify with me what we thought was important to share with other people, and how to go about organizing the texts and teachings that Reb Zalman left behind with particular focus and passion in the last decade or two of his life. So Netanel, I want to pass the baton to you, and perhaps you can say a few words about some of the challenges we faced in piecing together this anthology of this polymath and Rebbe of ours.
Thanks, Or. Well, I think part of the challenge of this book comes for me in answering the question that I was so often asked when people who didn't know Reb Zalman ask you, what should we read? And I'm looking at a shelf of 20 some volumes. It was never an easy question to answer. None of the books are fully representative of the diversity of the man and his amazing scope of interest and the things that he could talk about and the ways that he talked. Each book was different, and so you almost had to recommend a different book for every person. Whether it was Jewish with feeling or spiritual intimacy, if they were interested in psychology. And it was an endless problem. And so when Or approached me about us doing an anthology of teachings together, I thought, well, the moment has finally arrived where we actually have to take responsibility for gleaning the essential teachings from all the various genres of his life. And it was not an easy task. And Or and I can laugh now, but at a certain point we said, well, we'll just set to work. And we each, me in Boulder and he in Boston, set to work in two completely different directions. And a good way in, we had two very different books. I think me really pulling out the most intellectually sophisticated, flashy Reb Zalman, just really showing off the genius, or making a very, very accessible volume that would really introduce people. And at that moment, we had to come to an agreement. We thought, we either have to go separate ways or find a way to come back together. And in the end, I thought Or was right. We came a little more to the middle, but basically we needed to make, if we were making a first anthology of Reb Zalman's teachings, we really had to introduce him in a very accessible way through as many teachings as possible, and wait till later to show off some of his really brilliant sophistication. It's all represented here. We did come more to the middle, but after we were done and I got to read the thing, I really had a great sense of personal nachas, satisfaction, from the fact that I feel that a person can now pick up this volume, this one volume, and get a good sense of Reb Zalman's range and interests and the way he spoke. Even though when he wrote with, one editor or another writer, me or Joel Siegel, it came out very different. And trying to create a unified voice was very difficult. But in the end, I'm proud of the book, and I feel I can recommend it as a Reb Zalman primer. And so I'm very grateful to Or for throwing down the gauntlet and bringing us together for this it was a very challenging task to really try to find a one-volume Zalman, when the truth is he is a multi-volume endeavor.
Perhaps an entire library.
Yes.
Thank you, Netanel. It's been a pleasure, even in the moments of struggle and confusion, to be working with you. I also want to take a moment to thank a few people that helped us in different ways with research and collecting and organizing materials. The first is Rabbi David Mayan, who's with us, who did an incredible job of working with me on the many, many footnotes that we included in the book. And we probably could have included many, many more, because as was Reb Zalman's wont, he was an associative thinker. And so one story led him to think of another, and then that led into a drasha, homily, and that led into a personal reflection, etc., etc. And of course, he was a person of great intellectual and spiritual hunger. And so if he was thinking about Hasidism, of course, he was also thinking about Sufism and about transpersonal psychology. So I want to give a big yasher koach to David, Reb David, for his help. I also want to thank two of my students at Hebrew College, Joey Glick and Batya, Illinois, who did people's work in terms of sifting and sorting and attending to some of the technical pieces of the project, but also studying with me virtually every week and reflecting back to me what they were seeing and hearing and what they felt as emerging rabbis would be meaningful to other people that were less insiders than Netanel and I. So thank you. The last thank you I want to make mention of this evening is to Reb Zalman's family. The volume is dedicated to his children, and that was quite intentional because many of us in this session and many, many more people felt like we were the adopted children or nieces and nephews, in my case, to Uncle Zalman. but he also had a large family. And to be engaged with Reb Zalman as a family member meant that you were sharing him with a lot of other people. So we wanted to make sure that his family, and particularly his children and their children, know how much we appreciate all of these adopted holy beggars, all of the work that he did and their sacrifices. So thank you. With that, I want to turn things over to our first teacher of the evening. That is Acharya Dr. Judith Simmer-Brown. Dr. Judith Simmer-Brown was a longtime colleague of Reb Zalman's at Naropa University. In fact, she was one of the founding faculty members of that wonderful institution in Boulder, and she just retired 2 months ago after 40 plus years of teaching and scholarship and spiritual leadership. She's still very much active, but as she described in the chat before we went live, she chose a piece from Reb Zalman's work on the October, November, and December months of life given her recent transition. So Judith, the floor is yours. And Tom, if you could share Judith's text of choice for this evening.
Yes, each of us have chosen a paragraph from the book to share with you that could be serve as the basis of our remarks. So I will first read this paragraph and then share with you my reflections of Reb Zalman in relationship to this paragraph. When I stretch my awareness of time, I get in touch with an aspect of God that is called the Ancient of Days, which is witness to everything that has ever happened and never will happen. That's my companion for eldering. This kind of meditative work is what needs to be learned in October. When I go inside myself and start checking the past, I come to things that I don't want to look at, the file in which I keep my failures, the things I don't like, the things that are not yet reconciled. Anxiety keeps me away from there. But in that file may be treasures. Imagine I had some stocks from before the Depression that I thought were worthless, and I put them in a file of failures. And then one day I see in the New York Times a name that sounds familiar. I go to the filing cabinet and pull out the stock certificate, and by now it has become very valuable. So it is with failures. What I felt at the time was a failure, may be what moved me in a new direction. The fallout of my failures may be where my successes are. So this is the passage I would specifically like to talk about. It's from the work that Reb Zalman he was very much in this work when he came to Naropa University in 1995 in the October of his own life. And he had really reflected on how he had a lot of anxiety and depression about growing old. And he did a long retreat at Lama Foundation, and in that retreat began to really reflect on what this kind of period of his life really meant. It gave him a whole new motivation and excitement about new frontiers of his work. Somehow, this is a person who always found these new frontiers, new enthusiasms, new excitements, all the way to the end of his life. And so he talked a great deal about the October, November, December period of one's life, from one's 70s into the future up until one's death. This particular passage spoke to me because it touches on the tasks of October, which he says are reviewing your failures and letting go of vindictiveness and forgiving those who have wronged you. He talks a little later in this section about giving testimonial dinners for all the people who've wronged you. And you begin to see your past failures and difficulties and obstacles in a new light. What really struck me about this particular perspective and passage was the notion of going back to one's failures and getting new perspective. And it reminds me a great deal of how my teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and my Dharma sister, Pema Chodron, have talked about failure, that we, generally speaking, avoid failure like the plague. We want very much to be successes. We want things that confirm us and build us up and make us more sort of confident. But the really touching, important moments of our lives are when we are vulnerable, when we have something that really disappoints us, something that makes us feel very raw, and we don't really know what to do. And so it's not just looking back on failures. These are our teachings, not just for the October of our lives, but for our whole life, that when we have those times that we fail, where things do not work out the way that we wanted them to, and we feel embarrassed or disappointed or devastated in some way, these are the ripest periods of our spiritual journey. These are the times that we have the possibility of discovering things that are brand new. And if we have those failures in our past, we can go back and reflect on them. If we have those failures in the present and the future, we can mine them for all kinds of aspects of our experience that we maybe would have avoided otherwise. The periods of greatest spiritual growth, of greatest spiritual discovery, come from these times when we fail. And so Pema Chodron, who gave the commencement address at Naropa University when her granddaughter graduated from Naropa, and Reb Zalman was there, she gave a commencement speech called Fail, Fail Again, Fail Better. And she, rather than the usual pep talks that graduation speakers give to graduating students, she encouraged them to embrace failure as the ripest of opportunities to grow and learn and stretch. And this really, I remember how much Reb Zalman loved that. And that really spoke to me as something that would really, it speaks in Reb Zalman's voice across time, not just for people in the October of their lives, but for any time in their lives. I feel such gratitude for Reb Zalman and his lovely wife, Eve, and all of the years that they were part of the Naropa community. It was such an enriching time, and Reb Zalman's enthusiasm and generosity to his colleagues and his students will never be forgotten. I really appreciate being included in the volume and in this wonderful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Judith. It was a beautiful teaching. We turn next to Rabbi Shoshana Friedman, who is an educator, a rabbi, and an activist in her own right. She also happens to be the daughter-in-law of Reb Zalman. And so we asked her this evening if she would share one of Reb Zalman's favorite nigunim that he composed as part of a tribute to his Rebbe, to the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. So Shoshana, when you are ready, Tom has the accompanying slide.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for asking me. I think that Reb Zalman, who goes by Abba in our house, would be very delighted that we are singing. I should say really that he is delighted because he always feels very present. I'm looking over at where we have his sunglasses and hearing aids in the corner. He can always see and hear us. I think he'd be delighted that we're singing this song during the month of Elul. As I'm sure many of you know, Elul is thought to be the acrostic Ani ledodi v'dodi li, that from the Song of Songs, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine. As we go into this time of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the time is thought to be, I understand that teaching about Ani ledodi v'dodi li to mean that this time is not just about tshuva as we might think about it as repentance on a surface level, but it's really about the most daring of intimacies and the vulnerability that it takes to open ourselves up to what might come from true encounter. So these verses speak of a beloved coming to a garden, of a beloved standing behind a wall, and peeking through the lattice work, spying through the window. Can we let that beloved in? Pitchi li, open to me. So I invite you to sing along if you know it, or just listen and have this be a kavanah for your own opening to honest and authentic connection this Elul. Hine ze omen achakot leinu, achakot leinu, mashkiach min hachalonot, metzitz min hacharakim, badi legani, achoti chala, ariti morim bismi, badi legani, achoti chala, ariti morim bismi. Kol dori dofak pitchini, kol dori dofak pitchili, pitchili achoti rayati, pitchili, pitchili, bati legani, achoti chala, hariti morim bismi, bati legani, achoti chala, hariti morim bismi.
Thank you so much, Shoshana. Beautiful. So next I want to call on my teacher, Rabbi Arthur Green, who of course was both a student and dear friend of Reb Zalman's. Art and Reb Zalman, of course, together with several others, are largely responsible for the introduction of what we now call Neo-Hasidism into the American scene. And I've had the privilege of studying with Art for many, many years. Like my Uncle Zalman, Uncle Art knew me before I knew myself. So to share in this event with my teacher and someone who's a part of this extended ragtag family that we stitched together is particularly meaningful. Art, bevakasha.
Thanks, Or, thank you. I just wanted to say first to you and Netanel, what a wonderful thing you've done here. How thrilled I am about this book and how delighted I was to write a preface to it. Indeed, an anthology is so much needed. Netanel said it already. There are so many books and it's so hard to know exactly how to read Zalman. And Zalman is not the easiest person to meet on the printed page. I want to tell you a story. And that is when Zalman applied for the job at Temple University. I was in the religion department at Penn in Philadelphia, and Zalman applied for the job at Temple. And Richard Rubenstein wrote him a letter of recommendation, which he shared with me. And in the letter, he told the colleagues at Temple, don't read things he's written. You've got to meet this guy because he's a living member of an ongoing oral tradition. And he's really an oral teacher. And to meet Zalman, you have to meet the whole person and hear him say it out loud, or hear the words and see the words as the person speaks them. And that's so true of Zalman. It was true, it still is true. Meeting him in books is not the easiest way to meet him. And to give us a book like this where you get the best, I think of what Fritz Rothschild did for Heschel in creating Between God and Man, that anthology of Heschel that served as a gateway to Hesher for so many people. So I think this book has that potential, and I'm just delighted, and it's just delighted you've done it. I chose a poem of Zalman's. It's on page 42 if you have the book in front of you, or on the screen in front of you. Zalman, I must say, was not a great poet. English poetry was probably not his most successful area of creativity. But in this poem, he says things that are so real and so much of the place where Zalman and I meet. And this is, and Netanel, I would say, this is some of Zalman's more profound teaching and more of some of his most brilliant insights come out in this poem. So I just want to read a little bit and react to it and take it from there. This is really Zalman the mystic. Yah, my God, where are you? I call you as if from afar, but you, my Redeemer, dwell in my heart, so close and I know it not. Here you are, present in my innermost, and so too at the outermost edge, both my source and goal. Where my feelings rise, there you are, stirring me, nesting in the womb of my very urge. Here in my eyes, you are the pupil, and yet I yearn so much to make of you the object of my sight. Let's stop there and say, yes, God is within and God is beyond, and those two are never separable from one another. When I turn to God, I know it is the God within me that's turning to God. I know there's no real separation between the self with a small s, my own self, and the divine self that inhabits me, and the divine self that I seek. And I know that it's the God within me that makes me seek the God beyond. And since Zalman was brought up for so many years in Chabad, he understands that Sovev and Mamala are one, that those two sides of the divine self, the divine that fills all the world and fills the soul, and the God that transcends them all turn out to be the same God. And that's the great moment of mystical discovery. And Zalman knew that so well, and knew that it was exactly Shoshana was hiding behind the wall. It was that God. It was that God, the God of oneness, the beyond and the within are one, and the search turns out to be a big joke because, of course, that's God searching for God's self. The one is searching for the one self, which is everywhere, and bringing that God out from behind the wall. I like to say, bringing the monistic God of Judaism, hidden in Judaism, out of the closet, was so much what Zalman tried to do and what I tried to do. I feel very much that we are one in that work, that we are one in that task, and that God is so needed by people in our day who have lost the ability to relate to the purely personal God, to God as purely as other. But once you open to the possibility that God is within and beyond, and they are winking and peeking at one another, Zalman and I enjoyed sharing that insight so much. I remember when both of us read it also in Aaron Watts back in the 70s, we had great laughs about it and great joy at seeing somebody else who had discovered that truth. Of course, it was partly the truth we both gained from psychedelics. Zalman and I were both acid trippers in the late 1960s, and that was a moment of special closeness to us. And the cynic would say, well, yes, that all came out of the psychedelics. That's how the psychedelics made you read the Hasidic texts. But I would say just the opposite. That's how the Hasidic texts we loved so much and he was so deeply into made us read the psychedelic experience. That's what we got from it, because that's what we knew we would find there. So let me go on. My innards are pure, your sanctuary in me sacred by your presence. But how I long to scour them, to make them worthy of the honor. Show me how to host you here in my body. What a blessing you're nestling in my heart. Life of my life, you are within me. So how can I meet you on the outside? My soul I will address to you where you beside me, and not hidden in this voice. So how can I speak to you beyond me? I have an essay that's just coming out in a new book of mine called Judaism for the World, just out, and that's an essay called How I Pray. And you could put this poem next to the opening lines of that essay, and see that Zalman and I are really speaking the same language. How do you pray to a God who is not completely other? How do you pray to a God who is as much within you as beyond you? You become, dare I say this week, the Shofar. You become the shofar that the divine raises up and blasts out. You become the means by which God calls to God. Tehom el tehom koreh, says the psalmist. Depth calls to depth, and we are the means of that call. We are the voice of that call. Now the last part, zoned in the point of knowing, you hide an unseen splendor, glorious as I seek your glory. You hide an unseen splendor, glorious as I seek your glory. El mistater b'shafrir chevyon, asechel ha'ne'elam mikol rayon, said the 16th century poet in that poem that Zalman especially loved to sing to his father's Belzer Nigun to it. Lingering on your threshold, my ego squats, claiming to be the legal tenant of your home. More I cannot confuse the two who shimmer as one I amness. The two who shimmer as one I amness. Never can I leave this labyrinth, myself by myself. Help me, sortie, and free me. Then my prayer will be pure for you. For you, yes, who are ultimately no other. And the last section of it, I've got to rescue from the corner of my screen. Zoned in the point of knowing, you hide an unseen splendor, glorious as I seek your glory. Lingering on your threshold, my ego squats, claiming to be the legal tenant of your home. Yes, the last part, sorry. Echo, are you the call or the answer? Even these words, are they mine or yours? The answer, of course, is yes. The answer to all these questions is yes. Help and tell me, love of my heart. Are you not also the love and the heart? Hu ha-sechel, hu ha-maskil, hu ha-muskal, hu ha-ohev, hu ha-ne'ahav, hu ha-ahava. Yeah, adored one, I want to offer you a gift that you will not spurn. Your will be mine, is it not already so? Holy solitude, all one alone, my soul one, my soul's one, my partner, my holy, holy other one. Amen. Why do I need to write any more? Zalman said it already. Thank you, Reb Zalman. Thank you, Or Netanel. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much, Art. And among the other footnotes that you mentioned, of course, one other that feels important to mention relative to this poem is, of course, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And one can hear in this poem some of the early Heschel, who was questioning and struggling and seeking in ways that, of course...
Those poems that Zalman chose to translate before the other translation came out. Yes, Zalman loved those poems.
He was very attracted to that flirtation, we might say, in the young Heschel with monism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you for reading it and narrating it so beautifully. Joel Siegel, I hope you are in the house because we need some more music. Joel, as many of you know, was one of the people that helped Reb Zalman write and edit for many, many years. And we leaned on his work for this volume. Joel, I want to say a big yasher koach to you for the books that you co-authored with Reb Zalman. They really are wonderful testaments to the partnership that you forged with him. So if you are with us, I believe I saw you earlier among all of these beautiful faces. We'd love to hear the song that you wrote inspired by Reb Zalman.
Yeah, I wrote this after I was diagnosed with a davening disorder. The doctors told me I had to say things more than other people in order to really get there, which is what Reb Zalman always encouraged, whether you were using LSD, which I assume stands for L'Sa'ata Dishmaya, or not. So we'll try it. Kol yoshvei tevel, kol yoshvei tevel, kol yoshvei tevel, kol yoshvei tevel, kol כל יושבי תבל, על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. כל יושבי תבל, 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 על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו. על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. So maybe try to sing it with us if you can. כל יושבי תבל, 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 על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו. על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's beautiful. And of course, what you capture in the song is one of the important dimensions of Reb Zalman's teaching and his modeling, which was his love for humanity in all of its multifacetedness, and Reb Zalman's pioneering work, crossing religious and cultural boundaries, as Tom mentioned, from early in his life with his mentor, Howard Thurman, and then, of course, with many others, and helping us to understand that religious similarity and difference can and must coexist. And of course, we'll hear in a few minutes from Matthew Fox, one of Reb Zalman's other dear friends, and from whom Reb Zalman borrowed the term deep ecumenism. So thank you, Joel and Laura, for singing that into our consciousness this evening. Next, we're going to learn with and from Rabbi Tirzah Firestone. Many of you know Tirzah's work as a pioneering Jewish feminist mystic in her own right. More recently, she wrote an important book on intergenerational trauma, which has been very helpful to many people in the Jewish community and beyond in terms of unpacking some of the difficult baggage we carry with us. And of course, Tirzah was a very close student and friend of Reb Zalman's, and I want to thank her again as one of the members of the Yesod Foundation for, in essence, making this book a possibility. So Tirzah, thank you for your many gifts, and we're excited to learn with and from you, and maybe hear the shofar.
Hope so. Hello, everybody. It's truly an honor to be here. It's a moment of great celebration. I know what that feels like to just have a big work come to fruition. So big mazel tov to Netanel and to you, Or, and I'm very honored to have been asked to write a little word, some memories, a little anecdotes. And it's very moving tonight. I don't know if other people are feeling so verklempt. I'm just feeling extremely on the edge of tears. I feel this is what Reb Zalman would have really been a proponent of, these kinds of celebrations and gatherings, especially now when we're each in our own little box. We're each in our own little home, at home during the COVID pandemic. So I think all the more beauty. Thank you so much for calling us together, Or and Netanel. I'd like to start actually with before even going into this beautiful passage from the book, to say that just a little anecdote. I was once at a conference here at CU. Reb Zalman was there, and it was scalp tightening, heady, abstract. I was sitting in my chair kind of squirming because it had gotten so elevated and into abstractions. And finally it was time for Reb Zalman to come and to answer a responsa. And he just said, God made us with a brain that has two hemispheres. And that was all. And everyone just cracked up because it was just such a relief to, yes, somebody's going to say something from the right hemisphere, because it was so ultra rational. So I chose this next passage from the anthology because we are going in now. We're in the full moon tonight, just before Rosh Hashanah, before the Jewish New Year. And this struck me, and I'm also working on so much ancestral healing. I thought I would like to share this piece, but also do an experiential, with your permission, to do an experiential offering based on this piece of work. The search for roots, Reb Zalman says, is a perfect metaphor for what people want. Roots connect us with our environment and absorb nourishment from it. In their quest to reconnect with their roots and find their legitimate places in the universe, many people open themselves to experiences and rituals from which their ancestors derived meaning and ecstasy. Let's remember those words, meaning and ecstasy. Beautiful and fruitful words right now. For Jews, one of the strangers of these stimuli is the sound of the shofar, the hollow ram's horn. Whoops. Did I go off? There we go. For Jews, one of the I think strangest, I think maybe it is, of these stimuli is the sound of the shofar, the hollow ram's horn that is blown on certain holy occasions. When a Jew hears the call of the shofar, and may I say it may not only be Jews, it is a rich, many-layered experience encompassing a wide range of feelings. When we are in earshot, this ancient sound pierces our thoughts, our feelings, the very core of our being. It raises goosebumps on our souls. This is because we hear it with our own ears, but also with the ears of our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents. So I want to take a pause right there, if you would allow me to, and just ask, let's go back to those words, meaning and ecstasy. What gives us at this moment, which is so difficult, so challenging, and arid in certain ways, what brings us the greatest meaning and ecstasy? And for us to ask, Reb Zalman was very much, he coined the word folkways. And I want to ask, those are the pathways that were that were carved out by our ancestors. We all have ancestors from every part of the world. We have bloodlines in which our ancestors did the hard work to carve out channels to the divine. So I'd like to ask you, what folkways from your ancestral line provide you with meaning and ecstasy at this time of our lives and this time of world history, which is so difficult, so challenging, so fraught with fear and uncertainty? What brings you comfort? What brings you a sense of direction and purpose? And Reb Zalman was always into the sensual. That's what I loved. Also, he was such a beautiful intellect, but he would always point to the sensual artifacts and the sensual folkways that embed themselves in our nervous system to bring us a deeper connection, not only from the head and up, right? So I love to ask you, this is an invitation for you, wherever you're sitting, to get comfortable, just for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to ask you to go inside, bring your attention inside, and imagine that your wise and well and loving ancestors are behind you. And you might think of one or two who you know, you feel, and you love to call upon, a Bubby or a Zadie, or maybe you're a namesake. But if there's nobody in your bloodline, it may be Reb Zalman. It may be, if you're not a relative already, it may be someone that's a great, someone that you emulate and respect, you feel a similar frequency to. Someone from your shalshelet, someone from your spiritual soul chain, and allow that being to let you lean back into them. So sit back in your seat and just imagine that you can lean into them. Allow them now, because call them, you might actually, I find it very potent to whisper the name of the people that you are. Names are our spiritual calling cards. So when we whisper the names of our ancestors, of our teachers, they come to life for us. So whisper their names. And invite them to breathe into you. Invite them to pray into you. Invite them to empower you in this moment in world history, to empower you with resilience and courage to face what is before us all, to cheer you on. Allow them to cheer you on to go farther, actually, to farther in your life than they did. Surpass them. And as Reb Zalman was wont to do, he would frequently ask, okay, I'm here, I'm listening now, I'm going to be quiet, I'm just going to listen. So we'll just take a few seconds to listen to what our beloved ancestors from the unseen world are saying to us, our teachers, right now. Beautiful. And receiving receiving, they're forginning us. Remember that word that Reb Zalman used from Yiddish. They forgin us. They have joy in our joy. They want us. They have joy. They're kvelling for us to go beyond them, for us to be great. Thank you all. And stay inside if you like. And then I'm going to ask Tom to take us back into these beautiful words of our Rebbe. At times like this, when we touch a live wire of tradition, something mysterious takes place, something we cannot name or rationally assess. These experiences are the kinds of phenomena that Carl Jung and many anthropologists have talked about, though they too have had no explanation. The moments remain mysterious, but their authenticity is undiminished. So let's listen now to the sound of the shofar, which traditionally is blown every day in Elul in this month. And we reach to the source of time and space and listen into this primal, very primal and raw sound for direct, a sense of the direct spiritual experiences David Cooper, Zichrono Livracha, used to say.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Tirzah. Yashar kochech, beautifully done. Thank you for the blend of the head and the heart and helping us open our eyes and ears in this special time of preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Father Matthew Fox, are you in the house?
Yes, I am.
Fabulous. How to introduce you? You have been a pioneering, radical, dogged, loving, spiritual teacher to so many. And in you, Reb Zalman found a chaver, found a friend and a fellow traveler, person that was listening very deeply to the voice of the divine and calling him some strange and unexpected places. And as I said before, you know, one of the contributions, of course, that you made to all of us within the Jewish world that were students of Reb Zalman's was to give language to his interreligious spiritual quest, what he came to call deep ecumenism. So it's an honor to have you with us this evening and to hear a recollection of yours about your experiences with your friend and fellow traveler.
Thank you, Oren. Thank you, everybody, for this very moving sharing this evening. I figured it would be that way because it's in the spirit of Reb Zalman, and he moved and touched so many of us so deeply. Regarding this phrase, deep ecumenism, that he picked up on, I got it from, well, tinkering with Joanna Macy's phrase of deep ecology.
Yes.
So it's Buddhist and it's earth-based and it's now Jewish and Christian also, deep ecumenism. And my point was that we associate with one another from our varied and wonderfully diverse traditions at a level of experience, experiential, and not just, what should I say, arguing doctrines with each other. Enough of that. And of course, part of the experiential is working together in terms of social protest and justice work. I think it's very significant that this book was published by Maryknoll Orbis Press, because Maryknoll, as many of you may know, was the avant-garde of the liberation theology movement. And of course, they got sat on for it here and there and elsewhere. But I think it's significant that Orbis gave a home to Reb Zalman, not only significant, but meaningful. So one of my stories here was from a retreat I did with Rabbi Arthur Green in upstate New York. And Reb Zalman showed up near the end, I remember it well, and said, "Looks like you've had a fine retreat. Let's end with a ritual." "What kind of ritual should we do?" I asked. "A mass," he said. I said, "What?" Everyone here is Jewish except me. "Well, let's at least take a vote." And everyone except one older man approved. So we held a mass. And I concelebrated mass with about a dozen rabbis, women and men. Little did I know that this would be the last mass I would celebrate as a Roman Catholic priest. My letter of dismissal from the Dominican order arrived from the Vatican 10 days later. And I remember a 65-year-old man told me after the mass, it was a healing event of a lifetime for him. So I think that's a fun story about Rabbi Zalman, how, what should I say, precognitive he was, and how deeply ecumenical he was. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. He was also stubborn. I figure a few of you may know that. But I tried to back out, but no, he insisted. And we agreed on the common theme of the Song of Songs for the Mass. And so we chose a partner, we danced down the aisle and all that. But I do think, I'll always feel moved and touched that my last Mass as a Roman Catholic priest was concelebrating with a dozen rabbis. There's almost something deja vu about that. Now, I have to give a special shout out to Tirzah, because she kind of set me up with her talking about what she talked about, well, really all of you today, that when she talked about moving into the sensual, that Reb Zalman was into the sensual. He was into, of course, music and dance and all the rest, into the body. And I've just finished a book on Julian Norwich. It's called Julian Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond. Julian lived through the worst pandemic of the West, the bubonic plague. She was 7 years old when it hit, and it kept coming back in waves and into her 80s, when she died in her 80s. Now, a lot of people, there was no science, of course, to deal with the pandemic in her day, or even to look forward to a vaccine. But a lot of people went plenty crazy. For example, a lot of men said, well, it's our sins that is doing this to the world. So they developed a flagellant order, like where they would go from town to town 3 times a day and beat themselves with whips, because it was their fault, from their sins, that this plague was happening. And there was also scapegoating. The Jewish people were scapegoated, not for the first or last time, and others were scapegoated. There's not a word of anti-Semitism in all of Julian's book. And by the way, Julian was the first woman writer in English. And she had these visions at the age of 30, and then she wrote 3 versions of her book from those visions. Throughout her lifetime, she kept mining it for the deeper meaning. Just like a good dream, it often has many layers. And Reb Zalman used to like to call himself a Gaia Jew. At first, I saw that on the page once. What is that? And I figured, oh, it's these two words, Gaia, Jew, Mother Earth, and being a Jew. And this is where Julian really shines, that she developed the concept of the motherhood of God more richly than any writer up until the late 20th century. And it's everywhere in her writing. I mean, she reinterprets the entire Christian story in terms of motherhood, of the divine feminine, therefore. She not only calls God the creator mother, she says God is delighted to be both our father and our mother. She talks about Christ as our mother. She talks about the Holy Spirit as our mother. And she talks about this energy of motherhood and compassion that can displace a patriarchal religion. Now, Thomas Berry makes a point that the Black Death killed creation spirituality in the West. People became frightened of nature instead of experiencing the ecstasy and the beauty and the contemplative presence of the divine in nature. And that really, that explains a lot of centuries of Christian preoccupation with redemption, including the fear of hell and death, versus the contemplation and the ecstasy to be derived from our experience with nature and the divine in nature. Now, the word oneing has come up, God of oneness. Julian invented the word oneing, O-N-E-I-N-G in English. So it was at the very heart of everything she's writing about. This is, of course, a mystical experience. And as previous speakers have spoken to. So, and by the way, my regarding Orbis, a connection with Orbis and Reb Zalman and me, Orbis is now doing a book on my essential writings, and it's being edited not by people here, but by Chuck Burak, who is a wonderful Jewish scholar of wisdom and Kabbalah and spirituality, who lives here in the Bay Area near me. He was on my faculty for years. He's written a lot in Tikkun, and he's written books of his own. So I'm very blessed, but another example of deep ecumenism. The Jewish people found a Catholic publisher, a radical Catholic publisher, to do this book. And I found a very brilliant editor to carry the ball to the same publisher with my essential writings. So this is deep ecumenism in practice. But I really want to celebrate with you this amazing woman, Julian, because she stands up to matricide. That is what's happening on the planet. That's what climate change is. That's what coronavirus is coming from, our destruction of the planet. And this is our Mother Earth. And Rabbi Zalman was very touched and impressed by the indigenous spirituality of this land. It's nothing less than matricide, what is going on. And the coronavirus is just an example of humans overstating our importance on the planet and thereby destroying the bioregions of other species. And this destruction is coming back to bite us. So I think that Julian absolutely stands for the most radical shift that has to happen in our species today and through all of our religions and beyond, including science. And that is to deconstruct patriarchy and replace it with a balance of yin and yang, of the divine feminine and the sacred masculine. And she does it in a subtle way, not shouting and not screaming. But of course, she was ignored. Her book wasn't published for 300 years because she was a woman. And even after it was published in the 17th century, not many people read it. One person who read it in the 19th century was Florence Nightingale. And she was so inspired that she developed the entire vocation of nursing based on the insights of Julian around compassion and service and caring and strength, all of which she applies to the motherhood of God. So I find in Julian an amazing prophet for our time. And this flows so directly from what Tirzah was saying. When we did our little meditation that you led us in, I of course, ended up with Julian. And because I feel she is speaking today. We couldn't understand her until the feminist movement. She was 700 years ahead of her time. And we couldn't understand her maybe until this destruction of Mother Earth is staring us in the face and telling all of us and to change and to transform. And so I think often when I would run into Reb Zalman, immediately he'd ask, what are you working on now? What are you working on now? So I figured, well, I should bring that to this gathering. I'm working on Julian. She's worked on me. I just sent in the final text this week to a publisher. It'll be out in October. And I'm glad to be able to invoke Reb Zalman in this, who called himself the Gaia Jew. And Gaia is about Mother Earth. And we're all about that. And future generations will bless us for bringing the divine feminine into our consciousness, into our institutions, education, politics, religion, economics, business, all of it. This unbalance is what's destroying the earth. And I think that, Reb Zalman is very much in this struggle to bring the divine feminine alive and that Gaia might prosper. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Matthew. And one of the reasons that I approached Orbis with this book project is because they have this wonderful series of modern spiritual masters. And I knew that Reb Zalman would be tickled, would delight in the fact that he would be in a library with the likes of his teacher, Howard Thurman, and his friend, Thomas Merton, and his mentor, Abraham Joshua Heschel. And the fact that you are going to now be a part of that series, I think, continues what we would say in Hebrew is, very significant shalshelet, a chain of tradition of innovative and creative spiritual teachers, many of whom, like you said of Julian, were ahead of their time. So thank you, Matthew, also for risking being ahead of your time. And I know that was part of what Reb Zalman appreciated so much of you, were the spiritual and ethical and personal risks that you took. So keep on keeping on.
We had a question in the chat for Matthew about the title of the book. If you could say it again, and when is it expected to be published?
Julian of Norwich, Wisdom in a Time of Pandemic and Beyond. And it's coming out in mid-October.
Wonderful. And you'll let us know about it, and we'll let everyone who was part of this evening's celebration know about it.
Great. And I'll be teaching a course on her with Mirabai Starr beginning December 2nd on Shift Network.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
So we'll
Mirabai Starr translated Julian's book from the medieval English into contemporary a few years ago.
Thank you. As we wind down, I want to ask Netanel to magically reappear and share any closing thoughts. I want to share one brief story, and then Tom is going to close things out with a prayer, another of Reb Zalman's offerings. So Netanel.
I guess if I have anything to say at the end, inspired and following upon something that Reb Arthur said and Reb Tirzah said earlier. Reb Arthur was mentioning how the radical theologian Richard Rubinstein was saying that you had to meet Reb Zalman. You have to hear him speak. You have to be in his presence to know, what kind of magical individual this is. And Tirzah feeling him so palpably tonight. And so, while we have this volume in front of us, and I hope it communicates something to that man, what is coming up right now is the man. You know, the man I knew, the man I loved, and I can say love. He's still very present to me. As we were doing the exercise with Tirzah, I could feel him standing behind me. And here I am, I'm in his office right now. And it's a little transformed from what it was then, but his presence is still very palpable in it. Eve is upstairs, his wife is upstairs. And I'm remembering what an amazing, you know, there's the great man, but the man was great. And especially as a man. And I remember one day being up, I was about to leave after one of our work sessions, and Eve was standing with me in the front door, and she was telling me about a chapter they'd written in a book called We Two. And they'd both written about their relationship from his perspective and her perspective. And she says, you've got to see the illustrations that never went into the book, but she still had these little cartoons she'd done of little pictures of their relationship. And Eve has a great gift for doing quick cartoons that really embody a moment. And she looked at him and she was looking for permission. Can he see these? And he says, yes, yes. Netanel looks at me without hagiographic lenses, he says. You know, without the need to see me in terms of my sacred biography, but he can see the man. And the man was so amazing. In that vulnerability, he wanted to be known in that vulnerability. He wanted to speak to the future, to say we need to come into a paradigm of spirituality in which our spiritual leaders are not on a pedestal, are not archetypal but accessible. And if I think of a teaching in this book that speaks to that, there's a little passage in here on the soul's flaw. And it may be among Reb Zalman's more important teachings. It's not more than a page and a half in here. And if you knew him, you knew he often carried a little pouch. There was a little pouch hung around his neck, a little medicine pouch. And I was often asked, you know, what's in the pouch? What's he keep in the pouch? What little medicine is in there? And it always made me laugh, because he had his hearing aids in the pouch, of course. But it didn't mean that there wasn't medicine present, and not just for his ears. The real secret was on the outside of the pouch. Hung on the outside of the pouch was an opal. And as he explains in this teaching, The Soul's Flaw, the opal is beautiful and has a beautiful iridescence because there's a flaw running through it. And the iridescence in its beauty comes from the flaw. And the big secret that was there is that was how he conceived of himself, as a flawed person, but who had claimed the beauty of the flaw. And I've always thought if I ever write a memoir of my relationship with him, I'll call it the opal in the Rebbe's chair. So I'm thinking of that man. It was he was a tzaddik, a righteous person, but in a model that was accessible, very human and extraordinary. That's what I'm thinking of tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Netanel.
Ouch.
Wow, there it is. Cool. Very cool. Netanel, as you know, that's one of my favorite teachings too from the book, and it's something that I've shared with many of my students and my congregants, particularly in preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I can't resist the footnote, of course, which Reb David Mayan knows well, among others, that in that teaching, of course, Reb Zalman is riffing on Rabbi Nachman about the artisan that creates something beautiful out of all of the tarnished work of others. And Reb Zalman, I think, did that for many, many of us, and let us see our own beauty, and not just what was tarnished. And my story dovetails with yours, Netanel. It's the last time that I saw Reb Zalman in person. And it was Father's Day. And so I went to Connecticut with my children to visit my father-in-law. On the way back, we stopped and visited Uncle Zalman, as we call him, in the hospital where he was with Eve shortly before he died. And I told my children, I hope in an age-appropriate way, that this was an important opportunity to say something or to ask something of Uncle Zalman, because we may not see him again. We just don't know. He'd been through a lot. And so my daughter, never shy, sort of burst into the room. And there was Uncle Zalman, who, from my childhood, I always thought of as being very tall and strong and vital. And there was this little old man, you know, in a hospital gown, tied, you know, sort of tied to these machines that were aiding him. But as he always did, he had a knack for creating moments, for creating something sacred out of the mundane. And so I said to him, Uncle Zalman, the kids want to say something to you. And before I could finish, my daughter said, I have a question for you. And so he said, okay, what's the question? And she said, how did you get so smart? And he said, you know, to tell you the truth, I'm not so proud of the fact that I'm smart. The Kadosh Baruch Hu gave me a good cup. He gave me a good brain. And I come from a family in which education was valued. And so I learned a lot. He said, but what I'm more proud of is the fact that as I have aged, I've become not only smart, but wise. And then my daughter, without missing a beat, said, so how did you become so wise? She was 6 or 7 at the time, channeling Julian and her grandmothers and many others. And Reb Zalman said the following, which really does dovetail with what you said, Netanel. He said, I became wise by making a lot of mistakes and then trying to learn from them. And then with that glint in his eye, that beautiful smile that was, you know, so much of his signature, he said, and if you want to know about all of the mistakes that I've made, you can begin by talking to your Saba and your Savta, because they've known me for a long time, and they've seen me through many seasons of life. And that was the last time that I saw Uncle Zalman face to face. I think I spoke with him once more before he passed away, but it was a beautiful intergenerational moment and captures for me so much of what everyone has spoken about. The ability of this person who was experimental and iterative and sometimes wild, always seeking, loving, brilliant, to try and transmit, even in the last days of his life, something of the intergenerational connection and the striving for wisdom in an honest and transparent way. And though he had shrunk physically, I felt like there was a certain kind of transparency to this person, this soul, that really had come into his own as a Rebbe. And he had been practicing that craft for decades and decades. So I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening and celebrating this accomplishment, and also making a commitment by being here to continue to teach and share Reb Zalman's work, and to take up the charge that many of you have spoken about being both inheritors and innovators ourselves. Really taking from the roots, as he would say, as Tirzah said before, but also being very attentive as branches to our environment. You know, to think about, as his teacher, Howard Thurman said, to live on the growing edge. So thank you all. And Tom, I'm going to ask you to close us out for the evening.
Thank you, Or, and echoing that, thank you everybody for being here tonight. This has been an absolute pleasure and a blessing in and of itself to get to be here tonight and hear these tidbits. And as a quick reminder, if you want to continue to delve into these teachings and this wisdom, check out the course. I'll share the links again in the chat. Hopefully those should work. And then in closing, it seems right to leave with the blessing. And this one from Reb Zalman himself, which I adapted to be we language instead of I language, but I'll close us with this thank you prayer. Thank you, God of eternity, for the great wonders of your creation, for the earth, the stars, the sun, and the moon, and the beauty of your universe, with which in your great kindness you have blessed us. Thank you for granting us life in all its richness, for its brilliant moments of joy which allow us to soar as the birds, and even for its anguish and pain, which somehow seem to precipitate inner growth and change. For all these things, God, we are grateful. But thank you, especially, God, in your abundant love, for having chosen to make us human beings, blessed among all the fruits of your creation, with a mind to reason and seek truth and justice, with a soul which can feel pain, ecstasy, and compassion, and has the freedom to choose life and goodness over cruelty and destruction. And with a heart which can love and care, and reach out to touch the hearts of my siblings, as together we walk through the years of our lives. Thank you, and amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you indeed.